invite each of you to sign the attendance pads and pass them along the pews. As we gather together for worship, what announcements do you have to share?
Next week is our CBM meeting, and we are having pizza. And there's a sign-up sheet in the back, and for sides, desserts. So please join us then.
If you are able to sign up today, you don't have to bring a side or dessert, but if you are able to sign up, if you're coming, it gives us some idea of how much pizza to order.
There's a box in the back of the sanctuary. It's light green on the floor, and it's a place where you can put any donations you might make to the BHA Christmas Workshop program. That's a program where people like us give gifts or gift cards that are taken into BHA so that the parents can shop for their children, okay? Rather than getting a handout to the kids directly, so the parents can shop for that. So there's in the insert in everybody's bulletin, it describes what would be appropriate gifts to give, but use that green box back there and that'd be much appreciated. The deadline's coming up, it's November 18.
Greg is taking a script or has a script order. If there are others who want to buy gift cards through script, and then the church gets a percentage back of that, see him after worship today. Also, Thomas Holtzman is doing a whoopie pie fundraiser. Jonah and Gabe are both students at Holtzman. If you are interested, there is a sign-up order form in the back. If you can fill that out today, because they need to turn that in this week. If there are no other announcements, please rise as you are able for the call to worship.
Even though we don't always feel it, God is with us.
The darkness and doubt of the world threatens to consume us.
Yet God is with us.
All around us there is fear and hopelessness.
God brings to us hope and peace. We place our trust in God's abundant love.
Let us freely, without fear, open our hearts to God's healing words of hope. Almighty
living God, come and heal our lives this day. Open our hearts to receive your words of hope and joy, that we may become faithful servants of yours in this world which you have loaned to us. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Our first scripture comes from Job. Job cries out, "I know that my Redeemer lives," in response to not only what has befallen him, the loss of his children, property, and even his own health, but in response to the accusations by his friends that he must have done something to cause this to happen. Job feels utterly alone. But Job knows that God is there and that God knows the truth. From Luke. As we approach the end of the calendar year, we read passages that point to Jesus as the one who reigns, the one who reigns over life and defeats death. In this passage, we read about the Sadducees questioning the resurrection. Jesus' answer to the Sadducees' riddle is that God is the God of the living, and that their question about death does not apply. Jesus looks at the world and the riddle through a heavenly point of view, rather than the worldly view, which would be concerned about property rights, lineage, and inheritance. The heavenly view is that of us, children of God, and the worldly view of marriage, as understood in the days, should not be of great concern. From Job 19. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead, or engraved in a rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes. I, and not another, how my heart yearns within. From Luke 20. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second, and the third married her. And so in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to him, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is the God not of the dead, but for to him, all of them are alive.
My grandmother used to faithfully clip coupons every Sunday. And she put them in a green folder with tabs to separate meats and cereals and other grains, dairy products, frozen foods, canned goods, miscellaneous items. Now, she could not have compared to professional coupon clippers who manage saving so well that they can get an entire cart's worth of groceries for a few dollars. Still, she took the time every week to look through the coupon sections, considering what she would likely buy and what she probably wouldn't use even with a discount. Growing up, I would sometimes get to go shopping with her, and I loved the job of picking out the coupons and handing them to the cashier. These cheap pieces of paper translated into the equivalent of money, and the total bill would drop. She was a careful planner and shopper, but even she wouldn't use every coupon that she collected. Some would remain in her organizer until the expiration date had passed, and it would be my job to periodically sort through these coupons, removing the ones that could no longer be redeemed. 25 cents here, 50 cents here, even an occasional $1 off were plucked from the organizer and thrown in the waste can. It felt like a loss. Even those savings on an item never purchased wasn't truly lost money. More than lessons about coins and bills, these coupons were some of my earliest connections to financial management and responsibility and symbolic value. Now, I confess in my own life I've been less diligent about coupon keeping. I don't always shop at stores that take coupons, and I don't always buy brands that are likely to have coupons. But still, when I encounter something I think I can use, I cut or pull it out and put it in my own organizer, where it's up for grabs if I use it before it expires. I'm not nearly as diligent as my grandmother was. But I still marvel at how a piece of paper can be transformed into savings. This is how money works. Its worth is what it's representing, not in its intrinsic value. Now, the back of today's bulletin tells about collecting green stamps and turning them in for rewards. How many of you collected green stamps? How many of you are at least familiar with them? Joe did a great job of recreating some up front. Don't try to use them. You might be surprised to know that S&H green stamps are not entirely a thing of the past. If you happen to be a saver and you have booklets of them in some hidden drawer, you can still turn them in, not for merchandise, but for gift cards for specific locations, most of which seem to be in New York or Georgia. Instead, lots of us probably have savings cards of one sort or another. If you look at your keys or your keychain ring, these little plastic tabs, in my case, probably outnumber the number of keys I have. But I can use them and swipe them through and have a savings instantly, without having to do any of the work. If we save and we are loyal, we can redeem bonus points for free items or discounts. This This time of year, Giant says if you redeem enough points, you can get a free turkey. The philosophy works for physical items. But what does it mean when we talk about the redemption of lives? In the story of Job, we have a man who is described as utterly blameless. He becomes what seems to be a bet between God and Satan to prove a point about faithfulness. In Job's faithfulness, a result of the good is Job's faithfulness a result of the good things he's received, or is it a core part of his identity? In the many chapters that follow, it feels like he's little more than a pawn in a game. He's done all that was expected of him, but instead of being rewarded, he's subjected to every kind of tragedy imaginable. As he loses family and health and friends, he probably feels about as valueless as an expired coupon. In the passage that you heard Barb read, he has a desperate plea and a prayer, as well as a pronouncement of faith, to cry out that he knows his Redeemer lives. What is less certain, perhaps, at that time, is whether that Redeemer will come through and rescue him. What little is left of him cries out for one to recognize his worth, to trade in this shell of his life for something more. His words in the midst of agony point to a glimmer of hope beyond the flesh, blood, and bones that he has been reduced to. Taken as a literal story, it's hard to swallow. What kind of God would callously and casually play around with our well-being? We aren't just objects to be kept or tossed. What does it say about a God who we know from other sources, from other scriptures, calls us by name, tells us we are loved, we are valuable, we are bought with a prize and a price? As an historical accounting of an event, the story is more than a little bit disturbing. But as part of the background of this story, there is an attempt to understand that bad things do happen to good people. It's a challenge to the common belief at the time that if you did good things, you would receive blessings, goodness, prosperity. And if you were unrighteous, you would experience sorrows as part of God's judgment. The story of Job proclaims that even one who does everything right may experience hardship. Troubles are not necessarily God's punishment. There are still parts of Job that are hard to understand, but the idea that life isn't always fair, and that trouble doesn't mean that God has abandoned us, is part of our understanding of faith and how the world works. The Hebrew scriptures were trying desperately to wrestle with what it means to trust in God when innocents are harmed. What does it mean to keep looking for and believing in God in times when things aren't going well, when even our friends don't stand by us? Job, in the midst of his agony, doesn't accept that he has angered God in some way or that he should just curse God and be done with it. Instead, he holds fast to this idea of a redeemer. The Hebrew understanding of a redeemer was one who, as the nearest relative of a person, takes on the role of restoring rights and justice for that one, including avenging wrongs. Job is calling out for one to restore justice to him, even if it comes delayed, when his body can no longer sustain the torment he has experienced. Even if the skin covering him is stripped away, there is something that remains of his life that he believes will see an answer to his questions. The Hebrew of this verse is extraordinarily complicated. If you looked up multiple translations, you would find multiple meanings of what the sentence is trying to say. But each of them points to something that endures. When everything else seems to be taken away, Job anticipates that he will be redeemed, that life will be given back, even when everything else has been taken. Jewish thought over the years has debated if and how life continues beyond what we can experience with our physical senses. In Jesus' time, the Sadducees did not believe in resurrection, and they only accepted the 5 books attributed to Moses as scripture. Pharisees also included Psalms and the prophets, and they saw an opening for resurrection in these other writings. Now, the Pharisees would argue with Jesus about interpretation of the law, but on this matter, they were in agreement. In the verses you heard, Jesus has his only argument with the Sadducees, at least in Luke. And it's set up as a riddle, drawing on a practice that stated if a woman's husband died and he had a brother and there were no children, he must take this woman as a wife. It sounds incredibly sexist, not to mention illegal to our ears. But in that time, it was a law that on one part was intended to protect a woman, making sure she wasn't simply left on her own, or to preserve a family line for a husband who died without children. Known as the levirate marriage, it's still practiced in some cultures and communities today, but it had ceased to be common practice by Jesus' time. The Sadducees drew on that tradition as they created a situation or a scenario with a woman who becomes a widow 7 times with 7 brothers. Not like the musical 7 Brides for 7, 1 bride for 7 brothers. They asked Jesus to whom she will be married in the resurrection, the afterlife, that they don't believe in. Not because they want to know an answer, but because they want to trap him. Their concern is what a righteous response would be. What does the law say regarding with whom the woman should be identified? Jesus takes the conversation to a different level. Asking about the give and take of this life is not the only way to determine justice. Where the Sadducees were approaching the challenge from the perspective of a legal ordering of relationships, Jesus pointed to something more than the covenantal law we could see. Richard Swanson, biblical scholar and professor, notes that what is ultimately at stake is an understanding of justice in its broadest terms. He writes, the Sadducees understood this world to be the only world in which God would act as keeper of covenant promises. Pharisees understood that God would keep promises and enact justice even and maybe particularly beyond the boundaries of this world, which was a good and necessary thing, he says, because Rome quite clearly controlled this world and was clearly not going to be paid back for its injustices. Jesus removed the question from the trap that the Sadducees were trying to set, and he gave this fictional woman her humanity back. This hypothetical woman was no longer a possession of men, but a reminder that God is God of life and not of death. God is the God of all who live. The Sadducees' question was meant to trap Jesus, but instead he opened it to a broader question of how God brings and restores life. In truth, the question for us probably brings more questions than answers. While we don't have this tradition of widows automatically marrying family members of a spouse, we do perhaps wonder what happens to us when we die. I hear people longing to be reunited with loved ones. As we imagine life in its fullness, it seems natural to envision whatever we conceive of paradise to be filled with those whom we have loved and known and long to see again. In some form, eternal life draws us to God, but to one another as well. And although we can't begin to understand the fullness of life beyond what we see and experience here and now, everything about faith tells us that we are redeemed by God, who restores us all to restores all that is lost and fulfills us to receive what God longs for us to know and be. Faith and tradition tell us that when we die, we experience life in new and glorious form. So however ragged we feel, however used up, worn out, frayed, or forgotten, or broken we may seem ourselves, we are redeemed by one who knows our true value, who renews our life, who accepts us as we are. So much more than cut out pieces of paper stuffed in a folder or stuck to a booklet. We look to God, who first gave us life, and through whom we live, now and always. When we cry for justice, when we see injustice around us, we believe that Jesus tells us to live in a way that cares for the least among us. We use our lives here and now to reveal God's reign in our midst. But we are aware that not all wrongs are made right in our lifetimes. Like those who kept multiple books of green stamps to obtain an especially valuable item, we hold on to faith and trust with a belief that our greatest needs and deepest longings are transformed by God's righteousness. We hand our faith and our trust, and we receive a promise that will not let us down and that does not expire. We may not understand why bad things happen to us or why some experience repeated and overwhelming grief. We hold fast to the one who takes our suffering, who gives us life. We give our sorrows and our heartache and headaches and receive healing and hope. God, who is life now and forever, takes what is used or expired, redeems us, giving us a lasting covenant. While we experience the give and take, flows of joys and concerns, Jesus points us to a deeper and eternal reality. With Job, we dare to proclaim that our Redeemer lives. And with Jesus, we celebrate God who is living, who gives us life. Perhaps Madeline Langle sums up the promise of our Redeemer best with this statement. God doesn't stop the bad things from happening. That's never been the promise. The promise is this: I am with you. I am with you now until the end of time. We are with God. God is with us. Other things may come and go, but this truth remains. May it be so.
Redeemer lives, glory
great treasures have come to us from God's hand. The air we breathe, the lives we treasure, the love we have known are all gifts from our Creator. We are privileged to say thank you as we dedicate a portion of our resources for the ministry and mission of the church. For the future glory of your church, we dedicate our gifts. Toward the reign of love in our midst, we consecrate ourselves. O God of all the ages, show yourself to us in our time. Work within us individually and among us as a community of faith, that we may experience resurrection and carry your good news into the world. Amen.
Are you tired of chasing pretty rainbows? And are you tired of spinning round and round? Wrap up all the shattered dreams of your life. turn your sorrow into joy.
O God of all life, you hear our celebrations, and you hear our cries of despair. You hear us when we are weak and vulnerable, when we are struggling and suffering. You hear the things that we speak with our mouths and the things that our hearts cry out. Hold us in our vulnerability. Strengthen us through your promise and presence. Guide us as we seek to live to the best of our ability. Help us to find our way when the path seems gone or lost or covered over. Help us to find strength in the midst of struggles. Help us to remember that you are with us and that you love us. Redeem our lives. Forgive us when we have thrown away this precious gift that you have given to us, when we have neglected ourselves and our calling. Restore us by your grace and your mercy. Call to us and let us hear you. Let us know you. Let us have the strength to follow you. As we give ourselves to you in prayer and in action, make us new. Let us live as people of resurrection and redemption. Let us live according to the promise that you have offered to us through Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.
We have made known your
education. They're little squares that can be used to turn into schools, and they can get money to buy supplies. They're moving to a digital format, so even if you purchased items that support this box tops, there may not be box tops for you to bring in. However, if you brought them, or if you intended to bring them, or if you support or want to support in other ways, I invite you to experience redemption at the end of the worship service. If you have those slips, those box tops, we have a box or a basket for you to put them in. Whether or not you have them, you are invited to take a Hershey kiss or a Hershey hug as a reminder of God's everlasting, faithful love for you, for each of us. So go forth, people of God. Go knowing that your Redeemer lives, that you are kept in the peace and love and grace and mercy of God who goes before you, who guides you and sustains you.